anything. Penny, bring me an orange soda, honey. You haven't done a goddamn thing all day. Okay, so then we go to the typical, you know, everybody's 9 years old, starting with me. Different snippets that are things from the, you know what I'm about to be, don't you? The big 80. Jesus Christ, that's depressing. These things are all organized. And then throughout, he'll yell, Penny! Do we have a photograph of the ladies' man set? You know, and then Penny is throughout the interview. Penny, I love you, my darling, you old horse. So this, I mean, there's one guy who does more what I've learned than anybody. His name is Cal Fussman, and I think he's just moved to Los Angeles, somebody told me, to do Larry King's autobiography, ghostwrite his autobiography, because Cal has become the expert in writing in someone else's voice. And that's all he does. He refuses to do any normal journalism anymore. He will only write in other people's voices, which I think is like a story in itself. And probably somebody you should get to come in and talk, because he's fascinating. Yeah. I don't know him, but I did get an email from him after this, where he was like, touche. You took the old form and you shifted a little bit. Now, obviously, you cannot set out to do that. I did one other ones of these with Billy Bob Thornton, and it was weird, but there was nothing that I could really do with it. I kept trying to include in it the point where he arranges all the objects on the table in between us, and he just keeps arranging them. I said, what are you doing? He said, I have to have all the sharp angles pointing away from me. I said, well, why? And he goes, you see, all the people that I love, some of them are to the west, and some of them are behind me, but none of them are over there, and so I point all the sharp stuff in that direction. And I was like, okay. And I'm thinking, that's fascinating, and there's no way I can make it make any sense in the interview, so it never appeared. But actually, the editor who was talking to me about the compilation they're going to do, he's thinking this time, in the first one they did, they just printed the pictures in the interviews. Now they're thinking they may have little précises where people talk about the interview. And I said, and he said, I want to do Billy Bob Thornton. And I said, well, I got a great story, and I never got to write it. So, which is actually maybe a natural segue to a great story I never got to write. This is this month's issue of Men's Journal. Mickey Rourke on the cover. I did this piece. And this is an example of nothing is ever wasted. You may think you couldn't use something and it's just fallen on the floor and it's never valuable again. But sometimes you get to use something that happened 6 years ago that you never got to use. Men's Journal called me up in a panic on a Thursday night and said that they suddenly needed a Mickey Rourke cover story, and they needed it in 3 days. Oh, is Mickey in LA? No, he's in New York. I said, okay. He said, but we got it all wrangled. You just got to get there and interview him and do it. And I said, okay, well, actually, I'm really interested in Mickey Rourke. See, I had this interaction with him 6 years ago, and I was actually just trying to pitch this story where maybe if I could be with him on the day the Oscar nominations are announced in the morning at 5:30, and then I could follow him through the Oscar. But no one wants that because it seems too late. And so I've done all the research, like I know everything about him, and I've actually met him, and sure, I'd be happy to do it. So they call back and they're like, actually, we don't seem to have him wrangled. Do you know anybody who could get? I said, well, I know his agent. So I call the agent. I won't tell you what went down with the agent because it'll ruin the story. But so I flew to New York the next morning, and I interviewed him the next day, and I wrote it Saturday night and Sunday, and I turned it in Sunday night, and this is the result. And I'll read you just 2 pieces of it. This is the top of it. Just a few months ago, Mickey Rourke was driving around Miami late one night, cruising the streets of his hometown, when his cell phone rang. Hey, it's Bruce, a familiar voice said, but at first Rourke couldn't place it. Springsteen, the voice said. Rourke tears up a little bit when he remembers. Rourke, who's 52, has known Springsteen for more than 2 decades, a span of time that includes at least a few of Rourke's glory days and all of what he calls my lost years. During that period, the actor basically told Hollywood to go fuck itself, became a not entirely unsuccessful professional boxer, got the shit beat out of him, and lost all traces of prettiness in his once pretty face. Long before his recent comeback, he had found a good psychotherapist in the hopes, he says, of finally becoming, and this is a word he uses a lot, accountable. Rourke has a lot to account for. Once he had been mighty. In the 1980s, Time magazine said he had the potential of a young Jack Nicholson. A New Yorker critic, Pauline Kael, praised his edge and magnetism and sweet, pure smile that surprises you. He seems to be acting to you and to no one else, she said. With luck, she said, Rourke could become a major actor. Then he self-destructed. There were fistfights and violent marital squabbles. His ex-wife, the bottle Carrie Otis, accused him of assault and dropped the charges. There was prima donna behavior. He walked off a job because a producer wouldn't let his beloved pet Chihuahua appear in a scene. There was poverty, and there were many truly awful movies. Then in 2007, a really good director named Darren Aronofsky picked Rourke for a great leading role, Randy the Ram Robinson, a broken-down pro wrestler at the end of his career. Unbelievably, considering how hard Rourke had worked to dismantle the enormous goodwill the movie industry once had for him, he was getting a second chance. My last chance, he said. I'm not getting another pass, this is it. And to make the most of that chance, a movie called The Wrestler, he reached out to the boss for help. Quote, when we got done with the movie, I knew we nailed it. There was magic going on, Rourke says of the film, for which he transformed his already powerful body, adding 35 extra pounds of muscle. So I wrote Bruce a letter, a real long fucking truthful letter. And I said, I'm so glad that I didn't end up like Randy, because unlike me, Randy doesn't have access to someone who can help him to change. Rourke had poured his heart out, but still, when the phone rang that night in Miami, he was surprised. Bruce said, listen, I wrote a little something, the actor recalls. The song, which shares the film's title, plays as the credits roll, and its lyrics seem to perfectly capture Rourke's breathtaking, back-breaking, and literally skin-perforating performance. Have you ever seen a one-legged dog making its way down the street, Springsteen sings? If you've ever seen a one-legged dog, then you've seen me. I asked Rourke how Springsteen teased out that central theme before the movie was even in the can. Rourke nods, knowing the answer. He didn't see the movie, he says, but he knows me.